I had no idea who this guy was, like no idea. It was just like some weird bureaucrat. And then we just started seeing him like accumulate more and more and more power behind the scenes until the point he's now probably the most powerful person in the country. I think he's never given a TV interview. He's never gone on radio. He's never given an interview to a journalist where he's been quoted. He's never been tested on his ideas. He's never been held to account, I think. Like right now within the Labour Party, like his name is like absolutely toxic. As they're secretly destroying Corbynism, they are also meeting with Keir Starmer and incubating his leadership campaign. Really one of my big worries is that it's not just that Keir Starmer's going to be unpopular. I worry that they've broken the Labour Party.
Paul Holden, thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
So we're here to talk about your new book, The Fraud, Keir Starmer, Morgan McSweeney and the Crisis of British Democracy. You start the book, I thought, in quite an interesting way with a kind of framing of the narrative, talking about your time as a reporter on corruption in South Africa. And I was wondering if you could start by telling us a little bit about that. And are there any similarities between the experience you had reporting on someone like the government of Jacob Zuma in South Africa and on Keir Starmer and the Labour Party?
Sure. So, I mean, originally I'm from South Africa. I grew up in South Africa. And I started my career not intending to be a journalist at all. I wanted to be an academic. Like I was studying history at this university called the Wits in Johannesburg. I was like deeply invested in, South Africa's apartheid era, urban history, understanding the struggle. And I got sort of sucked into this, to researching corruption because I got obsessed with this one incredibly corrupt arms deal that had taken place in South Africa in 1999. With South Africa, 5 years after, Mandela's been elected as a president, is buying all this incredibly sophisticated weaponry that we didn't need, have never used from European arms suppliers. It subsequently emerged that, huge amounts of money had been paid to like middlemen and politicians to get the deal done. The BAE Systems was a big player in that. And at the time, I thought, I'll just write a book about that deal. I'll write a simple guide to that deal, put it out, go back to my academic life, which I did. And then as soon as I published that book, I got approached by loads of whistleblowers and got sucked into investigating not just that deal, but then effectively like this whole corrupt political architecture in South Africa at the time that sort of centered around, then it was Thabo Mbeki and then subsequently Jacob Zuma, who are our two presidents. And I sort of stuck with that, right? At times with like a great deal of like personal discomfort. It wasn't very easy to be there for a long time. For 2 years, I couldn't even actually go back under threat of arrest because of what we're investigating. So my lens has always been, and my lens is still, so my primary lens when I look at this, write about politics, is primarily like a corruption and governance issue, right? Like what is happening around us, and is it good or bad for our democracy? Is it good or bad for like our basic freedoms? Is it good or bad for like the direction of the country? I think if you read my book, I think it's very clear that I raise like all sorts of like really serious material issues, not just with like the ethics of the people involved in the political project that delivered us Starmer, but also like serious governance issues, right? Like proper issues around like unlawful conduct, proper issues around, real sense that the Labour Party, even before it came into power, was being quite aggressively captured by like corporate lobbying firms. I mean, what the difference is that, in South Africa, the threats that we faced, we did that sort of work was like quite simple. It was that you were worried physically for your safety, right? You were worried that people were monitoring you. You're worrying that there was going to be incidents, and there were one or two not very nice incidents in South Africa. Here, you worry about legal stuff, right? You're worried about people suing you. You're worried about slap suits. You're worried about libel suits, which is why I was very surprised when I was investigating the story when I found out, to my great surprise, and that's how I sort of start the book, was that the target of my investigation was Morgan McSweeney, who's now the Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister, and this organisation he ran called Labour Together. And I'd been working with the Sunday Times and a couple of other places about Labour Together and this pot of money they used and concerns about whether, how they broke the law around not declaring it. And I was then approached by a friend of mine who is this great investigative journalist who said, you should know that Labour Together have hired like a reputation management firm, and they're digging into you, they're looking into you, they're trying to find out where you live, they're trying to find out who your family are. And it's the first time I've been in the UK doing this work where I felt that sort of same level of like personal disquiet, the same sense of like, oh, this is not just like I'm going to get a legal letter and it's going to be like aggressive and ugly and expensive. Like this feels personal, right?
And just to stick with that for a second, what was the outcome of the kind of reporting you to security services or threatening to? Because, I mean, you write in the book about how that could really impact your work in South Africa, which is ongoing, as I understand it.
I mean, I was furious when I got that email. I was like genuinely furious because, you know, in South Africa, the work that I'd done, like since 2018, 2019, which I'm like insanely proud of this work. So I spent a good 2-3 years. There was a family called the Guptas who got very close to our former president, Jacob Zuma, effectively looted the state, looted South Africa. You know, vast amounts of money were stolen, huge bribery payments. There was this enormous leak of documents that I helped the authorities in South Africa sort of process. And we'd like really gotten to the heart of, like, we'd found their assets, we'd found their money, we were going after it, right? Like the work that I was doing, I did work with this commission of inquiry that then fed into like all these asset forfeiture stuff. And it's a big deal. It's big money you're getting back to South Africa. Like, I was so proud of the fact that this anti-corruption work could have, often when you do anti-corruption work, like you blow the whistle, you raise an issue and it doesn't go anywhere. This was like material outcomes, which is so rare in this field. But also it like made me a political target in South Africa, in that if I was the person who had unraveled some of the money laundering networks, if they could discredit me, then you discredit that work effectively. So I was furious at the idea that the Guardian's going to run, you know, maybe front page, maybe somewhere else soon, but like that essentially the story would come out that I'm being investigated by security services on the allegation that I had received material hacked from a UK state agency by some hostile state actor, probably Russia, right? And that would be like devastating for our reputation. I'd basically be spending all my time explaining how it's not true. My funders, we're not very well funded. It's hard to raise money to do anti-corruption work. Our funders would be like, your name is linked to Russia, what are you doing? That could be like absolutely devastating. And of course, I mean, the useful thing, the good thing, and the reason I tell the story in this way is that obviously the story didn't run, because I said to people, like, it's just nonsense. There's no truth to the allegation that I got the material this way. I can prove to you how I have the material that I have, most of which was actually from Freedom of Information request, not like a hack or anything like that. So that didn't run. And of course, I've never heard from the state agency. They're called the National Cybersecurity Centre. I've never heard from them. So I have to assume that they received this and they realized that there was nothing to it. But for a while I was like, you know, when I thought the story might run, it was like I was both a combination of very anxious and like extremely angry.
But the book is not about South Africa. No. The book is about Keir Starmer and Morgan McSweeney. So what was the kind of first thing that started triggering alarm bells in your head that this might be a subject worth investigating?
Sure. I mean, the sort of the catalyst is like very luckily I basically got access to this big set of documents out of the Labour Party. It's like really this very substantial trove of documents. That was sort of like late 2021, early 2022. And I'd been, you know, when I moved from South Africa to the UK, sort of 2009, 2010, I was like a Labour supporter, right? You know, came in, voted for Gordon Brown, voted for Ed Miliband. Like I was like Labour died in the wool. And I gotten to know some aspects of how the Labour Party functioned, but I wasn't like an insider by any means, wasn't really writing about it. And when I got this leak of material, my initial thought was, well, this will just be like tittle tattle, right? It'll just be like internal gossip about, you know, two factions being mean to each other, or like some people like fudging the lines on like internal selection processes. And actually, it was my partner Jess who was working with me at the time on some of this stuff, who uncovered this one email, and was an email in which Steve Reid, who's now the Minister for Housing, but very close to Morgan McSweeney, his aide was describing everything Labour had done behind the scenes, sort of 2017 to 2020, and it's saying all the stuff that there's no public record of Labour together doing any of it, especially getting involved in the Labour Party anti-Semitism crisis. And we're like, well, what were you doing? You're like, why is there no public record of this very boring seeming think tank doing all this like quite serious work, you know, that the public, I felt, should have known about? And we started pulling that thread. And basically, as we were pulling that thread, we realized Morgan McSweeney at the time, I had no idea who this guy was. Like, no idea. It was just like some weird bureaucrat. Realizing just how insanely influential he is, both like and how problematic his conduct was over such a long period of time. And then I was sort of like watching, it was like my partner Jess described it like a living nightmare a bit. Like you're watching, you suddenly we realize this guy Morgan McSweeney is powerful, problematic in many ways, and then we just started seeing him like accumulate more and more and more power behind the scenes until the point where he becomes chief of staff to the Prime Minister. And it's this like incredible moment of like, oh, this guy we've been following for ages, it's like, really, we have problems with him. He's now probably the most powerful person in the country. And at that point, I was just, it's plain that there was a real story to be told here. Not just about him and his character, but his political methodology, and how damaging I think his political methodology has been to the Labour Party, to, of which I was a member of for a long time, how damaging I think it is to like the fabric of British democracy, where I think it's going to take us just to some ugly places, and how I think it's like driven now, the outcome of all this process has been to drive like a mass loss of faith in the politics of the normal, right? And that can go to like really malignant places potentially.
And I think we'll get on to the kind of implications for British governance in a bit. But before, we need to do some scene setting. So can you sort of explain to our viewers what Labour Together is and what it was?
So Labour Together, it was originally founded in 2015. And it was founded, so the primary moving force is this MP called John Cruddas. And John Cruddas is sort of associated with what the faction they call Blue Labour, which is sort of economically progressive, workerist, but socially conservative. But he's by no means like a factional headbanger by any means. And he effectively creates Labour Together in 2015 because he's deeply worried that after Jeremy Corbyn's been elected, the Labour Party's going to split. His worry is that the right wing of the Labour Party will basically revolt and won't accept Jeremy Corbyn's leadership and will split off. And that means the Labour Party's out of power for a generation. So he creates Labour Together. A big part of it is to sort of help Labour understand how to get elected, but also it's about getting these factions to talk to each other. Right, it's supposed to be a body that gets the party to try and at least bury the hatchet enough that they can focus on their common enemy, the Tories. In 2017, Labour Together is transformed, and the transformation is catalysed by the 2017 general election, because for people like Morgan McSweeney at the time, he's very close friends and allies with Steve Reid in South London. He is from like a pretty right-wing part of the Labour Party, quite a small faction of the Labour Party, sort of Blairite, sort of people who would say maybe the Iraq War wasn't such a bad idea, that sort of wing of the party. For him, the 2017 general election, where Jeremy Corbyn's party does much better than expected, is a disaster. Because for him, it means he's irrelevant politically. He's irrelevant because he's from a faction that's going to be frozen out of power. But also, what we now understand from other biographies is that Morgan McSweeney just absolutely despises the left. He absolutely hates them. He thinks, in one account, that he actually thinks they're evil, that something Jeremy Corbyn's evil, stop the war is evil, and he needs to destroy that. And the vehicle that he does that through is Labour Together. So he's brought onto Labour Together days after the 2017 general election and uses Labour Together to pursue this project.
So I spoke to someone who's involved in some of Labour Together's projects relatively recently, and I read the review by John Cruddas. Mm-hmm. And so they both kind of agreed with your analysis that the character of the organisation did change, but they dated the change much later and thought that it was initially, even when McSweeney was kind of brought on board, it was still a genuine attempt at factional unity, and they kind of disputed your narrative. So why, like, what is it that makes you think that it was immediately when McSweeney was brought on board that the change occurred?
Well, there's two things there. I mean, one is that, I spoke to John Cruddas as well, and I interviewed him for the book. And the thing that was interesting about speaking to John Cruddas, I was speaking to him in 2023, and, I said to him, this is what I found out about Labour Together. Do you know any of this stuff? And he said, I have no idea what you're talking about. Literally no idea what you're talking about. So one of the things I discuss in the beginning of the book is Morgan McSweeney creating this thing called the Centre for Countering Digital Hate, this campaign called Stop Fighting Fake News. And I said to John Cruddas, like, did you know about it? No, never heard of it. So basically, and what I make clear in the book is that it's not the whole of Labour Together that's involved in this project. It's not like every director of Labour Together even knew what was happening. It was a small group of insiders within Labour Together that was involved in, and that's Morgan McSweeney and Steve Reid, who are sort of the primary figures. And we know that this is what they're doing because it's been, I think, quite widely reported now that I think it's end of July 2017, Morgan McSweeney distributes a planning document, this strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats document, which basically sets out a plan for what Labour Together is going to be doing over 2.5 years. And it's an incredible thing to have reported because it's about as close as you get to like discovering the thing that people like twirl their mustaches over, right? It's like this quite conspiratorial document where it says very clearly, like, we need to destroy Corbynism. and we need to then incubate the next leader. And in order to destroy Corbynism, we have to deal with all these different aspects of Corbynism that underpins it, including like an informational ecosystem around it. So it doesn't surprise me. And there's people who, who participate in Labour Together stuff, like in total good faith, only found out years and years later. So a good example is Neil Lawson, for example. So Neil Lawson, who's now the director of Compass, who I've spoken to as well quite a bit, he's now written about it a lot. Back in 2017, he's sitting in Morgan McSweeney's, Morgan McSweeney's coming to his house. They're sitting in Neil Lawson's kitchen, and Neil Lawson's helping Morgan McSweeney on the understanding that Morgan McSweeney and Labour Together are this cross-factional body. That actually Morgan McSweeney's idea is to like rehabilitate Corbynism, is to find a way to do Corbynism in a suit, Corbynism that's respectable, Corbynism that in McSweeney's telling isn't tainted by anti-Semitism. And they have all these fabulous away days, and they go to the countryside and have all these MPs. So there's lots of MPs who took part, and there's lots of people who took part doing so, thinking it was this factional body. And actually, it's one of the incredible things about the Morgan McSweeney story is that throughout this period, there's people who Morgan McSweeney has like said, come into our organization, help me out, let's do the cross-factional stuff. And then years later, they realize like, oh, this is totally where this has gone is totally the opposite of where we're thinking it was going. Like Neil Lawson is very clear. He was like, I was played, I was conned.
Neil is, I should say, a Byline contributor.
Is he really?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, Neil's like, and he wrote the great review in Byline of Get In, saying, which is Pogren and Maguire's book, and he talks about that experience of like, I sat there in good faith helping this guy, really thinking this is what it was, and it's something so completely different. And that happens again and again and again throughout this book.
That's really interesting. I just want to kind of pin you down on the intentionality of this, because
Sure.
I think that's one of the things that the book raises a lot, is the idea that this was intentional. And what you could imagine a kind of defender of the government saying is, well, they were in opposition, they've now taken power within the state, seen the kind of the country from this new angle of having to govern it, and have reacted accordingly. And a charge that kind of gets leveled against your book is this idea that it's conspiratorial. Maurice Glasman said the same thing on Newsnight the other day.
Yeah.
So could you really just drill down into why you think this, throughout this period, there is this through line of intentionality to misdirection, to deceive people, and to gain power through kind of, at the very least, like through misdirection, basically, at its most generous.
Sure. I mean, first of all, I should say that getting criticized by Maurice Glasman is like, I think, generally like a sweet spot for me. I'm very happy to be criticized by Maurice Glasman, who I really don't have much time for. I was a little bit upset by the fact that he got away with saying that my book was inaccurate on Newsnight, and I obviously had no right to reply. I mean, just to put the record straight, which I think I should do at this point, like I 100% stand by this book, which is based on such a vast quantity of documentary evidence, that my book is I have so many footnotes in my book that we couldn't put them in the book. If you look at the back of the book, there's no footnotes.
It's already quite long.
It's already long. So when I wrote the footnotes up, I realized they were 150 pages long, right? It was going to make the book like even thicker, so we had to put them online. So from an evidentiary perspective, like I'm extremely comfortable that I've used the same techniques I do with anti-corruption work, the same level of rigor I would use when I like approach like a court case or like giving expert evidence to the stuff. And also I was terrified of being sued as well, so I had to be like as careful as possible. I never try to overstate my case. I think it's bad anyway to overstate your case, but I was very aware of like what could I defend from like a legal perspective when I was writing stuff. I mean, intentionality, I think you have to look at pattern. You have to look at a pattern here, right? Like, and the first part of intentionality is this period from 2017 to 2020, where they Morgan McSweeney literally, I'm not making it up, it's not like I'm assuming it, he literally created a false front to fool people about what they were doing. He gave it a name. It was called Operation Red Shield. And Operation Red Shield was to take Labour Together and pretend that Labour Together was a cross-factional body working for inter-party unity, when in fact it was pursuing all sorts of secret projects to destroy Corbynism from within. And if you take the SWOT analysis to its logical conclusion, to basically make sure the Labour Party lost the 2019 general election as badly as it could, because that would then create the conditions for them to choose their next replacement. and that's not like suppositions. The SWOT analysis was written, and it's been written about in Patrick Maguire's book, in Kevin Brogdon's book. It's been written by Anishka Steiner as well. Like, it exists, it's there, it was written about, and it's a very clear plan to actively mislead the public about who they are and what they're doing. So that's like the dishonest heart of it. Underpinned, of course, we haven't even spoken about the money, right? Which is that throughout this entire period of time, he's doing this work with £850,000 that's been donated to him by a handful of wealthy donors, which Morgan McSweeney is failing to report to the Electoral Commission in violation of a law. And I make the argument in the book, they say, and that's not, again, it's not supposition, they were found guilty. That law was broken. They're absolutely guilty of that. My argument is that the sentence that was effectively handed down by the Electoral Commission hasn't been sufficient, because the Electoral Commission basically seems to have accepted that this was just a big error, this was like a big mistake. And I think that if you look at the sum total of the evidence that I've gathered, freedom of information requests, internal documents, I think there's enough to plausibly argue that actually this was intentional, that maybe this wasn't a big mistake. And so that's the first part, right? But then you go, well, how does it practically roll out? Is that, they're secretly destroying Corbynism, they are also beating with Keir Starmer and incubating his leadership campaign and using all this polling that they've gathered, that they've paid for in the party, to like get a sense of exactly what the Labour Party members wanted, so they could pitch Keir Starmer as like the perfect candidate for the Labour Party at the time, which is effectively like a radical, green, eco-socialist Corbynite inheritor. And the thing that's interesting about that campaign, that 2020 leadership campaign, not just that it's like brilliantly executed as a premeditated, curated act of like inventing a character. The Keir Starmer that exists in 2020 is not the Keir Starmer that exists in 2025. Like, however you want to explain it, they are not the same people. And it's not just that their policies are different, their principles are different. Like, at a deep fundamental level, the principles they express are different. Starmer in 2020 says, I believe in total freedom of movement. Starmer in 2025 says, Shabana Ahmed is right to like crack down on migrants. Starmer 2020 says that like fundamentally, I think the House of Lords is anti-democratic. It needs to be abolished immediately. 2024, Keir Starmer is using the House of Lords to appoint cabinet ministers, right? Like, these are fundamentally incommensurate principles. 2020 Starmer is saying, I think if it's bad for the environment, it's bad for the economy. 2024, 2025 Starmer is saying, like, I don't care if it's bad for the environment. If it's good for the economy, we're going to do it. We're going to do the third runway at Heathrow, even though it means we'll never meet our climate change emissions, right? These are fundamentally irreconcilable principle positions. And in each case, it's because he has adopted a different position as to which one is most politically useful at the time. I mean, it's plain, if you look at that election campaign 2020, that leadership election is such an interesting campaign to watch, because actually during that campaign, Starmer starts centre-leftish and then moves increasingly left as the campaign goes on, because Rebecca Long-Bailey is moving left. He starts by saying he's not clear whether he's going to support nationalisation of all the major industries. By the end of the campaign, because Rebecca Long-Bailey is saying, I support the nationalisation of rail, mail and industry. And of course, immediately as soon as he's elected, all of those things are dropped. Not only that, we know that there are journalists, Seb Payne is a good example, Sebastian Payne. There are journalists who have, subsequent to that election, have said that they were approached by people in Keir Starmer's campaign and said, none of this is true. So Payne said, one of the insiders of Keir Starmer's campaign said to him, look at these 10 pledges, and none of them will bind our hands when we are elected. It was widely known, actually, amongst a certain set of journalists, that Keir Starmer was never going to stick to any of this stuff, that this was actually just what he needed to do to win the leadership.
Someone who's kind of seasoned in politics would say, well, okay, yeah, they've sold the electorate a bill of goods to get elected, and then the finances kick in, and that's that. That's how politics works. It might be cynical, but that is how it works. So, what? Just elaborate on that. What is the kind of the implications for governance of this kind of deceitful or misdirecting methodology of politics?
Sure. I mean, I always find that question, and I know you're playing devil's advocate, I always find that question like super dispiriting. This idea that we should just like accept that politics is crap and that politicians are cynical and we shouldn't expect any better from them. Because actually, I think we do expect better of them, weirdly enough, even though we I think we all have like a degree of cynicism about politicians and what they do. the point is that there was a degree of trust in the Labour government. It wasn't huge, but it was there, that has utterly evaporated, right? And that trust is there and evaporates because people believe what they're saying for a bit, and then something else has happened. They believed it was going to be one thing, and then they delivered something completely different on all sorts of aspects of policy, right? It's not just the budget, which is obviously a key issue. I do also think that there are matters of degree here. To go from Starmer 2020 to Starmer 2025, where there really is, these are not the same political traditions, they're not the same people necessarily, they're not the same language, they're not the same philosophy, they're not the same principles. What do these people believe? Do they believe in anything? And I think increasingly people have a sense of, well, they don't believe in anything. They don't actually even have necessarily some deep underlying right-wing ideology necessarily. All they really have is like an orientation towards power and a pretty cynical understanding of how to achieve it, which is, basically to systematically mislead people as to what you're going to do, to go, it's literally expressed as part of their methodology. There's this report that's written in 2023 called Redshift that Labour Together does. It's a fascinating document. I mean, I think everybody should read it if you want to understand like how the Labour government won power and where it went. And basically what Redshift says is that if for the Labour Party to win in 2024, we've polled the public. We know what the public like. The way, because of first past the post, the way the country is split into different segments, you need to win 4 segments out of 6. 2 of these segments aren't important. They're not electorally important. They're going to vote for you anywhere. They're in safe seats. And it's basically, if you read between the lines, it's progressives, like young progressives, and it's centrist dads, basically. They say that these people actually aren't important. They're not relevant. All you need to do is appeal to people to whom or to the right of it. And actually it says very explicitly in Redshift, it says, what it shows is the public is far to the right of almost all Labour MPs, all Labour voters who voted for us in 2019. And there's like a disdain for these people, right? There's a sense of, they're going to vote for us anyway. So we just need to adopt these policies and then they'll get over the line. But there's no sense in that discussion. Or is it ethical? Right? Like, is it a good thing to follow what this particular segment, which doesn't like asylum seekers, is it ethical to go down that line? And second of all, is it practical? Are these good ideas? It's not even discussed as an issue.
There's a period in the book where you talk about McSweeney seemingly deliberately evading, or allegedly deliberately evading transparency rules about donations. And he claims that he's made a call to the Electoral Commission that has cleared the fact that Labour Together is not a membership organisation and therefore does not have to declare its donations by a certain time. And going back over my notes for Peter's book, Dominic Cummings does a similar thing during the Brexit referendum. Makes a call that no one has any, to the Electoral Commission, that no one has any kind of seeming record of, who's the only proof of which is Dominic Cummings' word. And that really struck me, this kind of similarity between the two kind of Machiavellian unelected advisors. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, what does it say about the structure of our politics and what is it doing to our politics to have these figures like Dominic Cummings and Morgan McSweeney, unelected, unaccountable, necessary for the leader to gain power, but then there is no kind of check on them, really.
Yeah. I didn't know about that, but that's really interesting. I mean, the difference there is that there is a record with Morgan McSweeney, right? That's what I got from the Electoral Commission when I FOI'd them. And I said, did Morgan McSweeney call you? Was there a conversation? And part of the reason I think that maybe he didn't report those things deliberately is that he calls the Electoral Commission. He says, I don't want to report donations. I don't think we should report donations. We're not campaigning. We're not public facing. And there's a long period of correspondence where the Electoral Commission writes back to him. First of all, it says, no, you are a membership organization. You absolutely have to report. And there's a long period of correspondence where Morgan McSweeney is reporting donations for a brief period of time. He keeps on getting it wrong, keeps on filling in the form wrong. And the Electoral Commission is saying, this is how you do it correctly. So it's incontrovertible at that point, absolutely incontrovertible that Morgan McSweeney knows that he has to report donations. And then over a long period of time, he's telling people he's reporting donations, right? He's telling MPs in Parliament, it's on the website, and he's not doing it. Which, at the same time, he's also running the secret campaign. And that's why I pulled together to say, well, this is a problem. I mean, what does it mean for these figures? I mean, there is a slight difference, right? In that Dominic Cummings, at the very least, you can read his writings, right? You can go and read his blog. He's given interviews. You know what he thinks. Morgan McSweeney is a vacuum. right? Like Morgan, there is nothing, absolutely nothing. He's never given a TV interview. He's never gone on radio. He's never given an interview to a journalist where he's been quoted. He's never been tested on his ideas. He's never been held to account, I think. He's never been put, at a very simple level. Like I always fantasize, what would it be like if you put Morgan McSweeney on like Newsnight and you said to him, explain to me the money situation. Explain to me how you got that advice and you were telling people this and you didn't report the donations. Explain to me how that happened and let him give an answer that the public, can understand. He's never had to do that. I've only ever found one video of him speaking to camera, one video. So there is that one difference is that, at least we sort of understood what Dominic Cummings believed and he was predictable as a result, whereas Morgan McSweeney is just a vacuum, right? There's been no sense of we can talk to him, find out what he believes, test his ideas, push him to change his ideas, put him up in front of the public and be like, is this an appropriate person to be chief of staff, right? And I mean, there's like a total accountability vacuum. Like right now within the Labour Party, like his name is like absolutely toxic. And the next leadership election that happens, and there probably will be one at least before the next election, a lot of it's going to be around like, well, how close were you or weren't you to Morgan McSweeney? Does he back you or not? And that's going to be like a defining issue for the membership. But from like a democratic accountability level, I mean, this stuff is a disaster. I mean, first of all, they're not reporting the money. Like, there's a reason we have transparency laws. There's a reason why we get people to report the money that they're getting. It's very simple. So that you're getting £850,000 in donations. People would have been like, oh, what are you doing with this money? Explain yourself.
A lot of money in British politics.
It's a lot of money in British politics. £850,000. That's like really a substantive amount of money. According to Pogrom Maguire, I don't know if the figures are right, and I assume they are. Apparently, that money was used by Morgan McSweeney to poll the Labour Party membership. Apparently, he spent more money on polling than the Tory and Labour parties combined. That's an astonishing thing to happen, and nobody knows it's happening, right? You got to look at Labour together. You're like, oh, this is a nothing organisation. It has no money. They don't take any donations. They've got £50,000 from last year. They have a couple of village hall meetings. Nothing to see here, right? Whereas if it was, oh, this guy's taken £750,000. He's gotten this money. Primarily, one of the donors is Martin Taylor, who's like a right-wing. He's been funding right-wing Labour courses for ages. He's a head fund manager. The other guy is Sir Trevor Chin, who's like played a leading role in like the Jewish Leadership Council and BICOM, has like a pretty robust views on Israel. And the Labour Party membership has no idea, actually, that these are the people funding Morgan McSweeney before.
When you say robust views, sorry, he's
pro-Israel. He's very pro-Israel. And he said, I think in 2013, he gave a comment where he said, I've spent my whole life working for Israel, right? And again, it's repeated in, and actually it's a theme that we pick up again in during Keir Starmer's leadership election in 2020. He doesn't declare his donors, right? He says, no, I'm declaring my donors in line with parliamentary rules, but I'm not going to tell you who all my donors are beforehand, which means that when the election is over, suddenly it's disclosed that actually Trevor Chin has been funding him. Actually, Wahid Ali has been funding him as well. There was like a real transparency gap. That's a proper, profound transparency failures to not even know who is funding the organization that's effectively incubated Keir Starmer's campaign, and then not know the people who funded Keir Starmer himself during his election campaign. Those are really profound failures. And the simple, I think it's a simple thing to ask is to say, well, what would have happened if Keir Starmer had declared, I've taken, 75,000 or 100,000, I can't remember the exact amount, from Trevor Chin during the election? That would be an issue for him, because for the Labour Party membership, which lean left, they'd be like, why are you taking money from this guy who's funded West Streeting and other right-wing Labour members? Does that mean your pitch to the left is believable? Have you made a deal with Trevor Chin that you're going to go more right-wing in your own power? That's a fundamental failure. Like, it's a really deep fundamental failure of transparency, right? And I think that is almost the defining feature of this project, is this like repeated lack of disclosure about who they are, what they're going to do. Something
that really struck me in the book was the fact that you quote repeatedly from Pogrom and Maguire, who say that Morgan McSweeney engineered the Equalities and Human Rights Commission inquest into Corbyn's Labour. And I remember reading Get In, and I think Get In's a very good book, but I remember reading Get In and sort of being stunned that they glossed over the implications of that a factional weaponization of anti-Semitism by a kind of state quango had occurred, if engineer is an accurate word, right? Why do you think that is? What is it about this story that leads so many people to just overlook inconvenient facts and quite important details, frankly.
I mean, the EHRC thing I think is interesting because the EHRC thing speaks to like a much bigger narrative, which is the anti-Semitism crisis, right? Which we haven't spoken about, and is a big part of my book, because one of the things that Morgan McSweeney does between 2017 and 2020, at the same time as he's not declaring his money, at the same time as he's running this like specific campaign to destroy Corbynism from within, effectively, is that he involves himself in the anti-Semitism crisis. He works with journalists to place stories about the anti-Semitism crisis, which if you read them back again, they're not brilliant. They don't really hold together. There's like a mixture of like serious stuff and like really not serious stuff.
Could you quickly give a sort of specific example of a story that you think doesn't hold up?
So the one that I think is a very interesting story, the one that we know for certain, well, there's a couple actually that we know for certain that Morgan McSweeney places, is this story that appears in the Sunday Times. I think it's in April 2018. It's titled "Corbyn's Hate Factories," and it's like a multi-page spread in the paper. And effectively what it is that Morgan McSweeney and this guy Imran Ahmed had spent a couple of weeks, I think, joining these open Facebook groups, which were Corbyn supporting Facebook groups. And what I mean by open, so anybody in the world can join them. So it's like they have like 500,000 to 1 million members, these groups. I think they identify, I think it's 20 different groups, right? And then they spend, weeks going through these groups, finding any incidents they can of I think that of anything that they consider to be problematic, which is misogyny, bullying, racism, and anti-Semitism. And they find 2,000 posts that they say meet this threshold of bullying, anti-Semitism, and misogyny, racism. We have no idea of how many within that is anti-Semitic. We have no idea whatsoever. But at first blush, and that gets turned into this. This is then used to illustrate that Corbynism as a whole is suffused with anti-Semitism. That actually the online ecosystem in which Corbynism flourishes is like this filthy cesspit that is a hate factory, and it's such an interesting word, hate factory. It means that this is an industrialized production line in order to manufacture hate. And that's a pretty insane thing to say. But then you start looking at the specific examples of like what is the hate and anti-Semitism that you're dealing with here. And there's real examples of anti-Semitism, right? So there's like somebody who says, I think it's like Tony Blair is a Jew through and through. Obviously, massively anti-Semitic, massively problematic. That person has no role in our politics, right? To say something like that. But then the other example they give is a woman by the name of Naomi Wimborne-Idrissi saying, I think the anti-Semitism crisis is overstated. I think this is a Blairite conspiracy. Now, Naomi Wimborne-Idrissi is Jewish. She's not identified as Jewish in the article, right? And she's saying, I think this is a Blairite conspiracy. And she's basically right, because that article is being seeded by Morgan McSweeney, who's a Blairite, who's engaging in a conspiracy to destroy Corbynism. Like, she's literally saying, well, that's presented as a piece of evidence of anti-Semitism. And the problem with the anti-Semitism issue is that the anti-Semitism crisis is made up of this sort of stuff. It's like really hard to untangle, like properly serious anti-Semitism that like has to be dealt with, and like nonsense allegations of anti-Semitism. I mean, for me, Morgan McSweeney's role in the EHRC is such a profound part of the story. Like, I don't think, like, it's such a huge part of the story. It is. I when I read that in Poggen and Maguire, because I had no idea. When I read that in Poggen and Maguire, I put the book down and like I couldn't read anything for a day. I was just like, I cannot believe this. I cannot believe he was involved there. Because he's then involved, I basically describe in the HRC, and I apologize for getting into the weeds here, but basically what happened to the HRC report, I think the HRC report is basically nonsense. Like, it really is like filled with the most basic errors of fact. Legally, it makes like little sense whatsoever. And what it relies on, actually, at a very crucial moment, the pro-Corbyn bureaucracy had put forward a series of legal defences to the charges in the HRC, and they're factually accurate. They're right. There are a defence. And then after they've been kicked out and Keir Starmer comes in, the HRC comes back and says, these are our draft findings. And Keir Starmer's regime withdraws that defence and replaces it with an admission of guilt. It's really fundamental to the HRC coming to that conclusion. And it's Morgan McSweeney who's in those rooms, who's making those discussions. It's Morgan McSweeney who's been working for years beforehand, who's then in the room deciding how the Labour Party is going to effectively help the EHRC find Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party guilty. And that is just like, it's such a profound realization about how our politics function. I mean, coming out of it, I think there's a lot of people who, for various different reasons, look at the HRC. I look at the HRC after that report and think, you're not fit for purpose. You are not competent to do this work. And then a lot of people will say well, who are you to ask this question? But actually, I do have a little bit of a background, because quite a lot of my time in South Africa was working with commissions of inquiry that looked like the HRC's report. I've actually even had one commission of inquiry in South Africa, its findings overturned on very similar grounds to HRC's stuff. I've gone we've set Commonwealth jurisprudence around this stuff. So when I read the HRC report for the first time, I was like, this is nonsense. I recognize the way in which these facts are being massaged. And then when I realized it's this faction that are in the room that are helping them make this decision, it's really pretty devastating.
Will Keir Starmer survive the year?
Oh, the year.
As in 1 year from now?
Oh, no. That probably meant I moved to the end of this year, I'd be 50-50. No, I don't think so. I think the May elections. I think the May elections will do it for him. May elections will be very problematic for them. I think it'll be a very bad set of results, and that'll be the catalyst for him to be removed. And what I worry about is we talk about this if it's a game, right? We talk about who's in, who's out, and it's a bit of gossip. What I worry about, I fundamentally, even though I'm extremely critical of this faction, and I'm critical of the Labour Party, I think the Labour Party is a good thing. I understand this is an institution that's 100 years old. I understand this is an institution that's worked with trade unions to give us workers' rights, that we have weekends, that we have maternity leave. I understand this is the thing that delivered us the NHS. I understand that the Labour Party has, generally speaking, been a force for good in our lives. This is an incredible institution. And I worry, really one of my big worries is that it's not just that Keir Starmer's going to be unpopular and that he's going to lose, and it's going to be a bit of ooh, what's he going to do now? Gossipy stuff. I worry that they have broken the Labour Party. That this project has done so much political damage at this point that the Labour Party can't recover to become what it was, to fulfill its potential. And that's a disaster. That's a real problem. Or maybe if it's not a problem, maybe if somebody else replaces it, it's better, that's okay. But I think it's a tragedy. I think it's unforgivable. Genuinely unforgivable to take an institution like that's so important to us. I'm going to get emotional, but it's so important to our lives and so important to our political fabric, and to treat it in the way that it has been treated, to use it as this nasty factional object, and to take people's trust and to take people's goodwill so lightly, to take the fleeting trust of a broken electorate, of an electorate that had been screwed over so badly for 15 years by the Tories, and then to do it again? Why do you do this? Fundamentally, why have you done this? All I know is that I look at this and I think this is a disaster. This is a tragedy. This is a crisis. And we need to get ourselves out of it. And one of the ways you have to get ourselves out of it is to understand them and to hold them to account as a bare minimum. And then we have to do something better with our politics, because this sort of stuff, this stuff is the dregs, this stuff is sewer, and this stuff leads us to really bad, ugly places. This stuff leads us to the far right on the rise.
Paul Holden, thank you very much for joining us.